Why do we not always raise our hand? Are we afraid to say something different? Do we fear we may be judged? If no one raises their hand, is it a human instinct to follow a crowd? The image you see here is me as 4 years old. It was my very first day at school with my trusty red briefcase. I was always quite confident, cheeky, and I was excited. I was excited about my future, and I was excited about the people that I might meet along the way. The other image is a slightly older Joe picking up my very first global award for the telecoms company that I own, and this was an awards ceremony in Las Vegas. So how does that 4-year-old Joe turn into someone who goes on to win global awards, run her own business, and become an international author? Did I need to ace all my grades? Not necessarily. In fact, I left school at 16. I raised my hand, and I took an opportunity to go into business with my brother. And at 16 years old, I wasn't afraid of failure. When I came into the telecoms industry, I knew nothing about the tech sector. But that was great, because it meant that I had everything to learn. But being a young teenager, starting out in business, something I noticed at first is that I had been copying and mirroring quite a lot of people that were around me, and I think we do that unintentionally. It was a little while later that I realized I needed to stop being like someone else. I needed to try and focus on being more like me. To do that, I needed to focus on my strengths. And when we internalize our strengths, it's not always as easy as it sounds. If I asked you to consider 3 personality strengths of your own, how easy would you find that task? If I asked you to write them down, how quickly could you do that? However, if I asked you to write down 3 personality strengths about a friend that you know, you could do them in a heartbeat. Once I focused on my strengths, I was able to become more like Joe and able to further my success more than I could have ever imagined. Sometimes we find ourselves focusing on the things that we're not good at. We do this unintentionally. But what we need to do is we need to focus on the inner champion, and we need to silence the inner critic. What are you great at? When I consider raising a hand, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in a meeting, you always get the people that raise their hand all the time. You also get those that never raise their hand at all. When I was 13 years old, I remember being in a maths class, and my teacher had said to me she thought it would be a good idea to move me from the bottom set of maths to the top. This was not a good idea. The people around me were shooting their hand in the air. They seemed to have all the answers. I sat there feeling lost. It damaged my confidence. I felt out of my depth. However, I did something at the end of the lesson, and I actually raised my hand for a different reason, not to answer a question, but I asked to be put down to the bottom set. And I'm really proud of that 13-year-old Joe. So I ask, is it better to be bottom of the top or top of the bottom? When I consider raising a hand in a business environment, it's interesting if you go to a meeting or a conference, people put their hand up. And then this happens. They say the exact same thing that you were thinking. And you think to yourself, I wish I'd put my hand up. I'll put my hand up next time. Next time. I asked my daughter, who is 13 years old, what it takes for her to raise her hand. She told me that she would only raise her hand if she was 100% confident of the answer. 100%. She sets the bar so high. I asked her if she would consider raising her hand if she was 75% sure of the answer. She said she would not. So is striving for perfection damaging our girls' progress? And the reason why this is important to me is that when I go into businesses and see women looking for progression, where are the women in tech? Where are the women sitting at the boardroom table? Where are the women working in my industry? Because only 19% of women in the tech sector in the UK are female. I wanted to tell you a story about when I went to Downing Street. In 2019, I was invited as one of 100 women to go to Downing Street to have tea with the Prime Minister. I had received an invitation by email. Now, being a woman in tech, I was a little dubious. Do Downing Street send invitations by email? How would I know? I've never had one before. Although I was sceptical, why would I be invited? Why would I be invited? I accepted the invitation. I went to London that day, and I thought, I'll just dress a little bit smarter than usual, just in case the invitation happens to be true. But self-doubt was still there. And although I am confident and still a little bit cheeky, like the 4-year-old I showed you, why me? Why had you been invited to Downing Street is what I told myself. As I moved over to Downing Street and I approached the big black gates, I noticed a flurry of women had also arrived, also holding their printed email invitation. I must be in the right place. I was one of 100 women invited for tea that day with the Prime Minister. And as I went in the black door and enjoyed my day, I was actually one of the first women to shake hands with the Prime Minister. It was a wonderful moment, a very special occasion. And as I left Downing Street and the black door closed behind me, I noticed there was women talking around me, and they were saying, what a fantastic day it had been. This was a momentous occasion, to the point where they had come up with their family, had come up with their parents, they had lunch in a fancy restaurant, because it was a special occasion. I, on the other hand, hadn't really told anybody I was going to Downing Street, in fear that the invitation wasn't true, and then I might make a fool of myself. And all I did was wander off on my own and got myself a sandwich. I don't know why I did that day, and perhaps I'd like to do things differently. But reflecting on who I am, the self-doubt is still there. Despite the confidence, despite the awards, self-doubt creeps in. I hope I might get another invitation one day, and maybe I'll do it differently. What was quite interesting about my trip to 10 Downing Street was, in a few days sort of leading up to the event, a couple of people had said to me, why have you been invited? Now, I know they don't mean that unkindly. Why have you been invited? And I thought about that for a while. I pondered on it. And I wanted to turn that conversation around, the internal conversation I had with myself. Why not me? Why not me? As a mum of 3, I know I have an important responsibility to take my children through life's challenges. And when we look at successful people and the successes around us, we don't always see the journey of how we got there. I ask you now, how often have you told your children or people that you know about a success story, something that's really fantastic that's happened to you and how you got there? We know the journey isn't linear. We all have hurdles and bumps that we have to overcome, and sharing those is an important part of how we can all grow together. I've been reading about some research from someone called Dr. Peter Benson. He is a scientist and a researcher, and he has one central idea, is that everybody has a spark. It could be something that leads towards your identity or a purpose, but something inside of you that fuels who you are. And I love this. I love this expression. He says that we are fires waiting to be lit. Isn't that a wonderful expression? To think that we can light ourselves up from the inside out, not the outside in. When it comes to putting your hand up, it takes courage. It takes bravery. It takes confidence. It doesn't always have to be a physical hand. It can be a virtual one. But the message is about taking opportunities that present themselves and not letting them pass by, not waiting for 100%, not waiting for perfection, but giving yourself a chance to see where it goes. So what have I learnt along the way? Well, I've learnt that putting your hand up isn't necessarily about answering a question. It's about helping the person next to you to raise their hand too. I also know that when I think about where we might find our next wave of entrepreneurs, teachers, authors, creatives, artists, I smile because I know that we'll find them in every classroom. You don't always need to know where you're going. You don't always need to know what's ahead. But we have to start somewhere. And everything starts when we raise our hand. Thank you for having me.